This is the strategy inside everything.
I'm Kaitlin Maud-Moon.
The Strategy Inside Everything is the podcast for people who think for a living.
Hi, y'all. I'm back. Have you checked out In the Demo yet? What Adam and Farah have been working on is amazing. And in the meantime, I'm excited to be guest hosting The Strategy Inside Everything again. Today on the pod, we have my dear friend and fellow strategist, Nishita Tamuly, joining us from the UK. Hi, Nishita.
Hey, Kaitlin. I'm so excited to be here and honestly so honored you chose me for this topic.
Before we jump into our topic for the day, which I think everyone is going to be really excited about, can you tell us a little bit about your career to date and how you got into strategy?
I do distinctly remember the moment of the aha moment when I was like, oh, you know what? I think I am a strategist. And this is cutting forward a little bit when I was doing my master's at NYU. And the program kind of allowed us to kind of like have day jobs while we kind of did night school. So I really just got my hands dirty in a lot of different lanes of strategy. So I tried like social strategy, brand strategy, media strategy, and kind of like just wanted to know what all of these different lanes were. And kind of after having a good feel of different lanes, that's when I realized that, oh, actually strategy is a mindset and that's just very innate to me. So I think that's when I kind of was like, oh, this strategy thing is just something that I'm innately good at. But kind of coming back to the beginning of the career trajectory, it's been pretty unconventional. I started in mechanical engineering, actually, which is like quite far removed from what I do on my day job or even night job, to be honest. But some would say that there's still kind of like the realms of strategy start there. And then since then, I've kind of like, did my master's in marketing and strategy. And that's I think the strategic career path really came into being. I worked at a lot of different creative and digital agencies. Currently, I'm at my first in-house job and still kind of like finding out like what strategy means to me and to people in the world. So that's the long and short of it.
Yeah. I love that. I never knew that you studied or were a mechanical engineer. That's fascinating to me. And I think one of the things I love so much about the strategy inside everything is that little peek into what you're saying of how strategy has manifested for people in other areas of life or how they've stumbled into strategy in their own way as well. Part of why I was excited to talk to you today is because it's a new year and because I know from knowing you that you have been on a bit of a personal development journey. So it felt like a perfect time to talk about how we evolve as strategists and we evolve as people and what the relationship between those two things are. So can you tell me how your personal development journey got started?
I love it. Personal development journey. It sounds so official and not messy, which it actually very much is. I think the real honest answer to that is growth has always been synonymous to living my life for me. I think for me, and not in like become successful and climb the corporate ladder kind of growth, but more like get to know myself better. Like, who am I? Am I living in my potential? And I think these last couple of years I think it's really honed into, am I living in my values? One of the kind of exercise I did early on in this journey was the Brené Brown core value, naming your core values exercise. I think you can find it on her website for those of you who are curious. And she talks about kind of like naming 2 or 3 core values that, you lean on to when you're making those big decisions in your lives. And it can't be more than 2 or 3. And courage and growth were kind of the 2 that I narrowed down to. And the exercise kind of forces you to think of those bigger changes or bigger transitions or big decisions in your life and like really think of like what made you take those decisions. And as someone who's kind of lived in 4 countries in the past 4 years, I've had my fair share of like transitions and big decisions. And each time the decision I made was based on, am I growing as a person in my life? Am I living in my like in my true potential, and do I have the courage to take this decision for me? So I think growth kind of has been very much the way I look at living my life. So in some ways, personal development journey has been part of my life for since I guess I began to think. But what I kind of to call out in that is, we all talk about like having visions and visions being our North Star in a journey towards any kind of development, right? And one thing a fellow strategist actually had said to me in passing one time, it was such a wise saying. She said that she's kind of opposed to having um, visions be tied to a North Star, because the North Star is, and visions can evolve. And she truly preferred values being acting like your GPS and guiding you wherever you're going, right? So even if your destination changes, your values as your GPS will really guide you to a path which is true to you, and is still taking you towards a destination or towards whatever that vision or goal is. And even if that goal changes, that's fine, but at least your values are always letting you stay true to yourself. And I think I really try to practice that a lot these days. As like I said, I think living in my values is kind of being synonymous to growth for me these days. And thinking about anytime I'm facing a decision, I turn back to my core values and think of like, is this really me living my potential in those core values? I forgot what the
it's okay. It's totally, no, it's great. I don't even know what to call her. I guess writer, philosopher, who I know, her name's Danielle Laporte, and she has a program called the Desire Map. And it's very similar to this idea of she calls it goals with soul, where if you set a goal and you have a very fixed idea of what it is, and you're on your way there, sometimes we cannot stop to check in with if we still want to be doing that, if it still feels good for us, because we're so focused on what it needs to look like. And so she says that what we should focus on is how we desire to feel. She calls them core desired feelings. If your goal is to feel in flow, free, and empowered, maybe this goal is right to nurture that feeling in you, or maybe it's not, and you need to identify a different goal or a different set of circumstances or decisions that you need to make. And I think that advice you got about this, a North Star can be dangerous because it's fixed versus values, I think is super relevant, not just in the strategy context, but in this idea of like strategy for our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what you said about the danger of it being fixed, right? Like I feel like so much of my life I kind of spent justifying my decisions because that's what, like that those were fixed and they were well thought out. And that is what I thought I wanted. And to a point where actually that's probably the answer to your original question of like the start of this real journey in the past couple of years was when I was a pretty problematic job back in 2020 when I was in Amsterdam. And it kind of was that mismatch between what I expected and what my decision was to choose that job to begin with, and then the reality of how I was feeling about it. And that's when, well, now in hindsight, I know that what I was experiencing was really emotional burnout. And taking that time for myself and like really questioning my choices and, confronting like, what is it that I wanted? Am I getting it? Is my expectation and reality really matching? That was kind of my first real radical act of self-care for myself, and honestly has been a turning point in my journey to like really grow and understand myself better.
And you can decline to answer this if you don't want to, but I'm curious, were there circumstances that you were able to identify within that work environment that contributed to your burnout that you now know aren't a fit for you, or that maybe you take a critical lens toward in your evaluating of future work opportunities?
I think the biggest one that I can say is that whenever there is more talk and less substance behind it. Like you'll always know it. Like there'll always be people, companies, whatever situations which kind of like hype up. We have this and we have that, and we are committed to whatever diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of that fun stuff. And when you kind of really evaluate, like what is the, like again, the difference between what is the expectation or perceived kind of like facade versus like what is the ground reality, like what are the actions being taken on a day-to-day to really meet those kind of big lofty goals, that can be a very clear indicator from the get-go. And again, a lot of this has to do with like how aware you are with your own kind of like, what do you expect, what are your values, how are you showing up as a person, to really recognize if the environment is supporting that or aligned with that. And so yeah, one of the things that I would say is like that, be real about the expectation versus like what are the hardcore facts on the ground. That was the, and don't try to kind of like, what do they, I think they say this about like relationship, like, don't fall in love with potential. Is the same thing with jobs and careers too, right? Like, don't fall in love with the idea of like what this person, this company, this brand, the strategy can be, like what is the reality of it. And I think that was my biggest struggle, and really trying to do the right thing, as I was thinking that I'm doing the right thing by pushing them towards that potential at my own cost, was probably summing up the reason for my burnout, because it wasn't physical for sure.
Yeah. And because it wasn't physical, I almost feel like that's more insidious and harder to identify, emotional burnout. Was there anyone who helped you realize that that was going on, or something that happened that helped you say, oh, actually, this is a thing, this has a name, and this is something I want to address?
It's funny because you're very right. It's very insidious and dangerous in a way, because speaking up about it requires courage, right? So there were a lot of my peers at the time who were kind of going through the same thing, and we would have a lot of conversations about how toxic it was, how we were not happy, things needed to change, it was really taking a toll on us, and yet like collectively, like we were not able to do much about it. Kind of again, and that's kind of, I lean back to one of my core values being courage, and having the courage to kind of say that, what, this is actually not good for me, and I need to step away from it. And what really helped me was a very practical thing that the Dutch kind of government offered to the people of Netherlands, which is something that should just universally be a thing, but it is burnout leave. And like, I think I wouldn't have known this had I not, like spoken to people about it. And I think one of my friends who lived in Netherlands for a lot longer, she kind of said that, do you know that the Dutch government actually supports this? So you should kind of like take off it. And that's when I was like, what? It is literally on a platter there for me. Like, all I need to do is have the courage to say, this is what I'm experiencing and this is what I need to do for myself. So it was a bit of like that emotional state that you're in, but like a very practical solution that a system offers.
Wow, that is amazing. We need that universally.
We need more of that. Yeah.
Certainly in our industry. And I do feel like my question was leading a little bit too, because I know my literacy around burnout increased exponentially when I joined the Ladies Who Strategize community. And you're also a leader of that community. And so you have an interesting perspective as a participant, but also as a leader, in seeing how the community comes together to support people who are feeling burnt out and know it or don't know it. What has it been like seeing those conversations outside of your own experience?
I think there's so much power in being in someone else's story, and I remember, I think Kim, who's the founder of LWS, she was one of the first people that I actually accepted that this is something that I'm going to do for myself. I'm going to take leave for emotional burnout. And her first reaction was like, she was literally like, I could hear the joy in her voice. I'm so proud of you for this for yourself. And that gave me so much courage to actually take that step. And it's not just her. Like, I feel like she kind of is the embodiment of the whole community, where when I started talking to people about what I was going through, the reception that I got with, like, what similar experiences that others were going through. And like, here was this entire community of so many brilliant people all over the world celebrating my decision to slow down and kind of being like, yes, do this for yourself, as opposed to every other conditioning that we hear about slowing down and taking time off and taking time for yourself being like bad, or like, something that is not to be proud of. And it was such a wonderful experience to just feel held by the whole community, to be honest.
Yes, yes. And so you made this decision. LWS had your back because that's what LWS does. When you first arrived at your I am now on leave, did you jump right into self-care and personal development? How did it look? Because I do want to talk about some of the things you've done, you've tried.
Yes. And I think you're going right into the Artist's Way as a program, which was, I think, one of the first things that happened to kind of I happened to come across during that time. And it's not when I actually started the program, but it was actually someone from LWS who spoke about Artist's Way and like thinking of like starting an accountability group to like do the kind of 12 weeks together. And I didn't really know about it before then, but it was kind of one of those things that I felt like I needed to do for myself. But like, before we even get into that, I feel like I could talk about writing as a tool. Like this whole podcast could just be about writing as a tool of self-care. And something that I have always done, but I think did even more so like early on in this phase of life, was really just reflect more and journal what I was thinking, what I was feeling, more intentionally, to be honest. And kind of coupled with that, what I did with all my time was also revisit some of like my older journals when 3, 4, 5 years back. And that was so therapeutic and healing, because I was reading things and finding a new perspective and wisdom in my own words. And I think people often kind of like ask questions about like, what advice would you give to your younger self? And I kind of want to flip the table and say, pay attention to what your younger self was saying, because she has a lot to say. And this is like one advice I'd want to give everybody, is to just take the time to document your life through your own words and eyes, because there is more value in it than you would think of. Like you wouldn't think of like revisiting some of your own past chapters, but that's exactly what you need sometimes to find that confidence in yourself, find that faith in yourself, that you're all right and you're doing okay, and you've always kind of like had your own back. So I think that kind of reaffirmed a lot of like the choices and decisions I was making at the time.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, writing, so hearing that you had this foundational journaling practice that allowed you to both create and process as well as reflect historically, there is an element of writing in the Artist's Way. But do you want to share like how the Artist's Way is bigger than that too, and any takeaways you had from it? And by the way, Julia Cameron is the author of the book and program, The Artist's Way.
Oh yeah, I think the Artist's Way, I think one of the premises, even with the writing part of Artist's Way, is that you don't think about it as writing. It's just it's a tool to unlock that inner potential and creativity and whole kind of like the artist within you, right? Like that's exactly what it's called. And I think it was a very interesting to kind of like understand that the Artist's Way could be for anybody. Like I don't think I would have called myself an artist before joining kind of this journey with, where you were one of the people who kind of like, I took this journey with, and seeing how other people were developing their relationship with art. And art could be so many forms, and the artist within you is really about that creativity in which you live your life, that sets you free to do, again, live the life that you want to design. And I think designing your life in some sense is also an art. And if that's the case, then all of us are artists.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And we both really resonated with different aspects of the program. So morning pages is what Julia Cameron calls the writing aspect of the Artist Way. And I think in the strategy world, it's very similar to what we would call a brain dump. So you're meant to do it first thing in the morning, wake up and write stream of consciousness. And I am not a morning person, as anyone who has ever worked with me can attest to. I'm a little bit more of a night owl. I always have been. But there's another aspect to the program that really resonated with me, which is called artist dates. And the premise of that is that you make intentional time to nurture your creative self. And again, that creative self can look like anything. It could look like model building, or it could look like writing, or it could look like visual art, or it could be working on your car, or clean, a deep clean of the house can be art, it was a framework for asking you to create intentional time and loving time, because it's called a date, to nurture that part of yourself. And so sometimes for me, it was as simple as going to the park by myself and listening to a podcast, because when else do I have time to just sit and listen and get inspired by something, or go to an art gallery, or get coffee with an inspiring friend. Were there any memorable artist dates that you did while you were doing the Artist Way?
That is something that I was never really good at. But I always took inspiration from you, and you just made the artist dates sound so like, I don't know, the good laissez-faire life, and I feel like you made it feel deserving and worthy. And I think even long after, I'm not really doing the Artist Way program anymore, even though I do my morning pages, I still kind of channel some of my Kaitlin energy when I'm like, oh, I just feel like indulging in myself today. So for me, what I kept out of that practice and kind of all of your examples was a day when I kind of want to indulge in myself, I'll go to a nice coffee shop and pay my £4 for a cappuccino, which I could just make at home, and just sit and people watch, read, write, whatever it is. But that, I think, is one way to kind of celebrate myself a little bit. So I've taken some inspiration from you there.
Celebrating yourself is so important. And for people who have experienced burnout, the idea of doing anything laissez-faire for a little while is so counter to the way you've been operating that led you to burnout, that for me, those things were very challenging at first. And I think for some of the people we did the Artist Way with as well, who were more resistant to the artist date portion of it, because it feels like it's not productive. But I feel like if I can trick myself into loving doing nothing, or loving that $4 indulgent coffee where my only job is to sit and enjoy that coffee, then maybe I can rewire some of the burnout, the tendencies I have that got me to a state of burnout, and hopefully repair some of that. And that's my thinking, not my psychological perspective on it, but that's how I try to trick myself into doing it.
I think you do have something there, though. And what you say about rewiring is really, really important, because I feel like slowing down is very much unnatural these days to what we're conditioned to be. And it does require practice. And that's something that, rituals like this really, really do help. And one of the kind of rituals that I've consistently maintained over the last few years is my morning ritual of waking up, meditating, doing my pages, making my cup of coffee, sometimes tending to the plants, depending on if they need water or not. But that has been the most consistent part of my life through all the changes that I've been through over these so many years, living in different homes and countries and different emotional states. That stability of those rituals has really made slowing down a consistent practice in my life. And I can tell that the periods that I fell off the grid with my morning pages, I could physically tell how it was cluttering my life and mind up. And the moment I kind of like got back into more of a consistent rhythm with it, it just felt freeing to like let it out on the page and, kind of find that freedom in the ritual itself.
I love that. And to me, what you're describing is not a hard to reach standard of a morning routine. We read these things in like The Cut, New York Magazine, and like, check out a so-and-so entrepreneur's morning routine. And it's like, I go for a 10-mile jog. I make freshly pressed green juice, this, and it feels like so daunting. And what you're describing is, so soft. It's like the word that comes to mind, and slow, like you said, but slow in a really juicy way, like a really affirming way.
You make a really good point about sometimes these things feeling very unattainable. And I think that's kind of what my barrier was for the biggest time. Like, how do I kind of like break this down for me? And at the end of the day, like the like you said, soft, and kind of, I have it on a post-it here, is gentle actions. And I think that's like, what is your gentle action? Because I know people who like that 10 mile, if that's realistic, run in the morning, is a gentle action for themselves. And for me, that's like, hell no, like you're not going to catch me doing that unless I'm like running for my life. But yeah, like, like I love coffee, and that's kind of like, just making my own coffee in the morning is my gentle action towards myself.
The other word you said too earlier was like ritual, and this is my ritual. And taking something in that, like making coffee for myself, and taking it out of this place of, this is a thing I'm doing that's functional to survive so that I can grind all day and get my deliverables out the door, but instead making it like this moment of gentle action and taking care of myself and savoring it and tasting it and smelling it and having it be this ritual in a way that gives it a little bit more, I don't know, meaning in life, instead of being the supporting character to working, work, or going to live my life in all of the things I need to do on my to-do list. I do think helps reframe and helps, again, with that, get out of that burnout mental state where it's like, I need to do this to do these other things, but rather I need to do this to care for me because I'm important.
Yeah. And what you said about like, make coffee the hero of your day, like coffee deserves to be the hero. And I think that's so beautiful, because you're right. Like, none of this would actually happen though if you don't slow down and say, you know what, I am going to take the 5 or 10 minutes to make my coffee, as opposed to kind of like, just like doing the instant thing and grabbing it on my way out or whatever, and like just taking whatever, like smell, like, and they say like stop and smell the roses, like whenever that thing came into being, like that there is merit in that, in like the really like slow moments of your life, because that is when you get to kind of like acknowledge why are you even doing something, like be more intentional about it. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like, anything that you do intentionally is going to add meaning to your life, whether that's making coffee or writing a deck or changing the world.
How has this self-care, personal development journey that you've been on influenced your work as a strategist?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it somewhere reminded me that strategy to me is a mindset, not a career. And it really allowed me to kind of get out of those lanes that, like I am a social strategist or a brand strategist or a research strategist, and just kind of like think about strategy as the bigger picture, like there's strategy inside everything, like as the name of the podcast is. And paraphrasing Seneca here, but like it really kind of like made me think of like, I'm not meant for any one corner of the world. So why should kind of like my strategic mindset be? And I think that really opened up the way I think about strategy, to think about how I apply strategy. And I think one of the reasons why I made the shift to where I am today is really kind of like acknowledging that I have a lot more to offer, and that can have impact if I just open up the way I think about my career, if I open up the way I think about where I can apply strategy, and I think just elevate what I have to offer to the world.
You have so much to offer the world. Has it been possible for you to bring some of that slowness into your work at all? And if so, how? And if not, how do you cope with that?
That's a very important question, because one of the things that I would want to kind of stress on is this whole idea of slowness or slowing down. It's a verb, right? It's constant. It's not like I learned the art of slowing down and that's it, one and done. I think it's a daily practice, and there'll be some days when you're better at it than not, and some days when you're not able to live it at all, and that's okay too. Doesn't mean you have to go and relearn the art of slowing down. It just that whole idea of practice and ritual and really being intentional about wanting to slow down. And I think one of the traps that of slowing down can feel like, oh, you're falling behind. So there's a distinction to be made here. Like, slowing down isn't falling behind, and as it kind of tying it back to like parallel to how it affects work, is this constant kind of productivity porn cycle that we are all in. And you're like, am I being productive enough? Am I doing enough? Am I being good enough? Can I do more? And I think that's a constant struggle. And when you're trying to kind of juxtapose that, but I want to be more intentional, but I want to kind of slow down. And I think there's always going to be tension between these two. And that's okay. I think the important thing is to kind of like think of the sum of the whole. Like, if you're still able to be more intentional than not, that is a win. And I think the important thing to remember here is that you're not going to really see that change in like the big sweeping wins, right? It isn't going to be like glaring in your face. Someone isn't going to give you an award for it. It's going to be in those really tiny moments, which are so easy to miss if you don't pay attention. And to make it a little bit more tangible, like I was just thinking of it a couple of days back, something that I would get very bothered by earlier is that if I was not included in a meeting that I was meant to be on, that I was clearly meant to be on, and earlier I would get very agitated and try to be like, oh, like, why can't people just whatever, do their thing, and like get really frustrated about it. And recently I started noticing that if I am not on a meeting that I was supposed to be on, my reaction is like, oh, well, you know what? Okay, it's their loss, because I know I would have added value here. And this whole kind of narrative of access to me is a privilege. And it isn't just about like who gets access to me and how much I let people in, but it's also about like, I know I have a lot to offer. Do you get access to it? Are you deserving to get access to it? And part of it is, well, if you bring me in the room, then you have access to it. If you don't, then I get to spend that energy somewhere else. And I think that's how I've been practicing this more intentionally at work too, like just being okay with where do I allow access and where do I draw a stronger boundary.
I think if there's a thing that burnout teaches us as well, is that we have only a finite amount of energy to give things. Mm-hmm. And when you give and give and give to a job, and I won't say work, because I feel like mm-hmm. like I share your perspective that work can be extremely broad. Mm-hmm. But let's say a job, then that can lead to that place of feeling like, well, I just don't have much more to give myself, to the people I love, to the things I'm passionate about in the world, to my community. You feel disconnected, you start to shut down. And so reframing this idea of access, like, well, I only have so much, and it is a privilege to be able to use this energy for other people to benefit from this way of thinking that I'm bringing to them, or my resources that I have. And I don't know, I just picture you like standing so tall and strong in that now. And that's so awesome and empowering. And I think it's a little mindset shift that anyone can start to adopt if they think about it that way.
Something my coach said to me to kind of help practice this more regularly is that what might you be able to do if you take the energy back from here? And I think that's it's kind of like a pull question for me now. Like whenever I kind of find myself getting agitated about something, I question myself that, is this really worth it? Like if I just save my energy here, what might I be able to do with? And can I invest more in LWS? Can I show up for that lunch break? Can I kind of, just go for an artist date? Like that making it that tangible with what I can do, what else I can do with my energy really helps to practice it more consistently.
I want to talk, you said you have a coach. Have you benefited from coaching? Is that something you would tell people to look into who may be facing something like burnout or the new year scramble of what am I doing? Has that helped you?
100%. I think I've been with my coach for over 7 years now. And I think it's been like literally like a journey of so much growth, right? And growth at different stages. And I guess to answer your question, I'd say it really works for me because I am a person who likes accountability, and I'm a person who kind of like finds it very hard to ask for support. So having a coach to open up to and kind of like work through some of these things which I shy away from, like telling other people, has really worked for me to open up to the people who I kind of really want to open up with. But what I really want to get at is for anybody who's kind of like seeking any sort of aid in any way, I think seek that support, whether that support is through a coach, a therapist, a community, a writing course, artist date, whatever it is, but like, I think support is such an important part of living and in your values, in your potential. And, like there is so much going on in the world which can really make you question who you are and what your value is. And there's all sorts of narratives just waiting to crush you. And finding spaces for support is kind of like where you don't feel insane. And I think I have to give a shout out to LWS here, where I feel like that the community and kind of like all it embodies has really made me feel seen and not insane for kind of being who I am, and having and holding such high standards for myself and for my life. And like, I think without the support of the community, I don't think I would have been able to speak as articulately as I am about my whole journey, my struggles, and what I've done to support myself by the ways of the support of the community, the support of my mentors, my family, my coach. And I think so the key word here would be seek that support in whatever way works for you.
Yeah. One way that I recently heard about too that sounded so appealing to me as I'm thinking about where I'm going to draw support from this year, there's this kind of radical, mystical, pink-haired, witchy woman who I've been following on social media for a long time. Her name is Gala Darling, and she has something that she calls her magical morning practice. And with a friend, so she has a buddy that she does this with, they have a little accountability practice where every morning they send each other a voice note. And I believe it follows a certain template, like, I am just, hey, I think her friend's Natasha that she does this with. She says, hey, Natasha, it's Gala. I'm setting out to have a rock star day today. Like, here's what I'm hoping to feel, throughout the day. Here's what I'm hoping to do. And to me, I'm like, that's so easy. I can just pick up my phone, record a little voice note, send it to a friend. But just knowing that someone is hearing you, whether it's I'm putting the positive intention out there, or knowing that morning someone is expecting me to send them a voice note. If it's the morning where I don't want to get out of bed and I just want to send a voice note, I'm struggling to get out of bed. But then as soon as I start recording, it's going to be like, I want to get out of bed, right? Like, I'm struggling to get out of bed, but I'm going to do it, Natasha. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go for a walk around the block. And now I've already looped in and created that support so easily. So I don't think it always needs to be a coach, like you said, or, doing a big undertaking like the Artist Way, if you can just find that one friend or your partner or someone that you can reciprocally collaborate with on the process, like a great creative art director, copywriter pairing or something, right? That it helps a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it there. It's just about that collaboration, that partnership of like, whether that's for accountability, whether it's just for a check-in, whether that's to build off of each other. Like that's like at the end of the day, like we're all human beings and we all need connection. And that's what support is just a form of connection, to know that you're okay and you've got this. Sometimes you just need that reminder.
Yeah. So as we near the end of our conversation, I'm going to ask you the classic research question, which is, what did I not think to ask you today that you were hoping to talk about? Anything?
We covered this a little bit, but I kind of don't want to miss the opportunity of talking about like what's really hard about kind of slowing down. And we touched on it with a little bit of like, it is kind of like a continuous, it's a verb and not like it's a journey, not a destination. But something that I've been reflecting on lately in this, in this whole kind of journey, is that slowing down really is a way to reacquaint yourself with yourself, right? And that means that you're going to kind of like revisit every decision and every choice and every kind of like part of life you've lived. And that can also mean that it's going to really feel confrontational to like justify and defend those choices and the life you've lived in and loved in and lost in, and say that, what, maybe that didn't work out, maybe that's not for you. And that can feel like an attack sometimes. And I think the hardest part about this is not being hard on yourself. And that's kind of where we don't talk about the hardness of this. Like, while there is so much merit and so much to get out of like the process of slowing down and really reacquainting yourself with yourself, it's really it can be really emotionally draining. So sometimes, and I'm definitely one of them, but people get obsessed with like growth and like being a better person and like living in your potential and like doing the right thing. And sometimes it's really just okay to do the easy thing and to just kind of like let yourself be and not have to kind of like prove that you're growing and prove that you're slowing down and prove your choices, and just be like, what, I fucked up there. That's okay. Tomorrow is another day, and I'll kind of practice this again. So really, really want to underscore how important it is to be kind to yourself in this whole journey, because it can be very, very confrontational.
Yeah. And I see the parallels between what you're describing and how you end up burnt out from something like a job. Because if it's that you are doing all the things and you're the person that everyone relies on in the company, and how do I make myself completely indispensable? And then you lead to a place where maybe you're burnt out. It can be very easy to fill the space up that you've created if you are trying to create space, or if you're making a change, or you're able to take burnout leave. It can be very easy to go in and say, okay, well, now I am going to do all the things to be my best self. and now all of a sudden you've created the same, I need to be accomplished, I need to be there, wherever, somewhere other than where you are in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so to truly, I think, correct and heal some of the behaviors that are inherent and celebrated in our industry, it does require that discomfort you're describing. We're like, oh, when I stop doing all the things, there I am. Like there's whatever is going to come up. There are the things I was trying not to think about, or the things I was trying not to, I was working away, and they'll be there. That's hard.
Yeah, just sitting with them is hard. But the full sentence there really is that sitting with it and really just letting yourself feel what you're feeling has so much value, because you kind of like finally listen to the thing that you were meant to listen to in the first place to overcome it. So we often just skip the step of like sitting with it because you're like, oh, it's inconvenient and uncomfortable. but sitting with it has so much merit. And I kind of want to give you a shout out on this one, because I think the first time I actually consciously sat with my feelings was when you kind of did the art therapy exercise at the Mexico retreat with LWS, and just sitting with those uncomfortable feelings and thoughts, and like coming to the end of the exercise where you learn to become friends with them was like a game changer for me to, just be like, oh, you don't have to like intellectualize everything. Just sit with it and it will tell you what you need to hear. So I think, there is real value in kind of just sitting in that ickiness for a bit.
And the thing is as strategists, we're primed to, like, we know this is true. We're primed to know this is true because anyone who's ever run a focus group or moderated an interview, for example, the truth always comes out in that like little moment where at the very end of the interview, you say, do you have any questions for me? And then they say something that really rocks your world, or they ask you a question that totally reframes your thinking about whatever it is you were trying to learn in the first place, or they just make one offhanded comment that totally blows your mind. But if you weren't there specifically with the intention to listen, you would have never learned. And so how do you bring that intentionality back to yourself and truly just listen and listen to the whispers before they become the screams?
I think this needs to be like a disclaimer for all strategists, that we should just practice the strategy of life on ourselves as well as we do it at work, because honestly, that's what makes us better strategists, right? Like opening your mind, opening your kind of world outside of your narrow lanes, and kind of like the questions you're supposed to have answers to, and like the latest innovations you're supposed to be knowing, and like the latest culture reports you're supposed to have read. I think outside of all of that, when you just think about life, that's what makes your mind richer, and obviously it's going to make your work richer.
Where can people find you on the internet? Anywhere? Are you fully off?
I'm still very much on. I'm just kind of like choosing more intentionally, as with everything else, like what I want to share. But you can like, I'm if you Google me, you'll definitely find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, wherever. Like I'm there. I'm just like, what I'm saying maybe a bit more less frequent or more intentional, as I like to think of it.
And as mentioned, Nishita, you're one of the leads in Ladies Who Strategize. Hopefully in the show notes, we can drop the link, since we talked about LWS a lot. And is there anything else you want to promote or talk about today, direct folks' attention to?
I think since we are talking about LWS, I think that's definitely one thing that I would like to call out, that the importance of community. And like, if you are a female or non-binary strategist anywhere in the world, our community is open. So definitely apply. But even if you don't kind of like meet that criteria, like find yourself a community that you can kind of really let yourself be seen in. So I think that would be what I would encourage people to do.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Nishita. I'm so excited for folks to hear this and get to think about life strategy.
Thank you. And I think as one parting thought for everybody, if I could leave you with, is something that kind of brought me to this point in my life, is really reflecting on the fact that lessons that we're meant to learn will keep repeating till you learn them. So slow down and pay attention to what those lessons might be. Even the parts, like listen to like all of it, all parts of you, even the parts you kind of want to hide and shy away from. Because like I said, those are probably the ones that will really set you free to lead your life, not just live it. So thank you for allowing me to say that.
Yes. +1.
If you have an idea, a question, or you want to push back on something you hear in the episode, go to that'snotaninsight.com and leave a message or voicemail for me. The best and most interesting messages will be added to future episodes. The Strategy Inside Everything is produced by me, Adam Pierno. If you like what you've heard, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Actually, I have no idea if that helps or if it's ever done anybody any good. If you really want to help the show and you liked what you heard, share it with someone else who you think will get something out of it. That's the best way to help the show and keep the conversation growing. New music for The Strategy Inside Everything is by Luke Headliner. You can learn more at Headliner.app. If you like what you're listening to, you can also go to Luke's Patreon and make a donation. It's at patreon.com/Elizna. Find links to both in the show notes. If you want to learn more about your host, Adam Pierno, you can find it on adampierno.com. Learn about my books, speaking, and consulting practice. Thanks so much for listening.